The low rumble of the old pickup truck's engine was the only sound that had been constant for 3 days. It was a steady mechanical heartbeat against the vast, quiet canvas of the American landscape. Inside the cab, Gabriel Foster kept his eyes on the gray ribbon of asphalt unwinding before him, his knuckles white on the worn leather of the steering wheel. He was a man in his early 40s, tall and lean, with a strength that was not bulky but forged from endurance. His short brown hair was lightly dusted with silver at the temples, and his face etched with lines of hardship and vigilance held a quiet kindness in the set of his jaw and the depths of his hazel eyes. Dressed in his uniform of choice, a faded navy and gray plaid shirt over a plain t-shirt, worn denim jeans and sturdy work boots, he looked like a man who was more comfortable with tools than with people. Every few minutes, his gaze would flick to the rearview mirror, a nervous habit he could not break. The road behind was always empty, flanked by the towering Douglas firs of western Oregon, their peaks disappearing into a low-hanging mist. There were no threats here, no hidden dangers. He knew that logically, but the part of his brain forged in the dust and fire of faraway lands refused to stand down. It remained on watch, a sleepless sentinel that saw shadows in every tree line and danger in every unfamiliar sound. A soft whine pulled him from his thoughts. From the passenger seat, a large German shepherd shifted, lifting his noble head to rest it gently on Gabriel's shoulder. This was Ranger, a magnificent 5-year-old dog whose thick coat was a rare blend of wolf gray and patches of white. His intelligent amber eyes were fixed on Gabriel, full of an understanding that transcended words. Ranger was not just a companion. He was an anchor, a living, breathing presence that kept Gabriel from drifting away on the chaotic tides of his own memory. Gabriel reached over his calloused hand, stroking the dog's head, feeling the familiar rhythm of his breathing. The simple contact was enough to loosen the tight knot of anxiety in his chest. For months after his discharge, Gabriel had tried to fit back into the world he had left behind. He tried the city with its relentless noise and jostling crowds, a constant barrage on his heightened senses. He tried the suburbs with their polite fences and unspoken rules, a quiet that felt more suffocating than peaceful. Nothing worked. The ghosts of his past were too loud, the silence of civilian life too empty. His only constant, his only source of stability was Ranger. The dog had saved his life in Afghanistan. During a routine patrol, Ranger had suddenly stopped refusing to move forward. The dog's behavior was so unusual that Gabriel had signaled his unit to halt. Seconds later, they discovered an IED hidden in the path ahead. That day, Ranger had saved Gabriel and 6 other men. When Gabriel was later injured in a separate incident, Ranger had stayed by his side, keeping him conscious until help arrived. Their bond had been forged in the crucible of war, unbreakable and profound. Finally, with what little savings he had left, Gabriel packed his few belongings into the truck and started driving west with no destination in mind other than a place where the world might finally leave him in peace. That was how they found Oak Ridge, Oregon. The town appeared almost by magic out of the dense fog, a small collection of buildings nestled in a valley. It was not a bustling place. A single main street featured a grocery store, a diner, and a few other small businesses. It was quiet, unassuming, and surrounded by miles of deep, silent forest. It felt like the edge of the world. For the first time in a long time, Gabriel felt a flicker of something other than dread. It might have been hope. He parked the truck in front of a small cafe called the Pine Cone. Taking a deep breath, he gave Ranger a reassuring pat before stepping out. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and pine. Inside the cafe was warm and inviting with wooden tables and the rich aroma of coffee. A few locals looked up as Gabriel entered, their gazes lingering on his weathered face before returning to their conversations. Gabriel sat at a corner table, his back to the wall, his eyes automatically scanning exits and potential threats. Habits too deeply ingrained to break. A young waitress approached, her smile genuine but cautious. "Coffee," Gabriel nodded, his voice raspy from disuse. "Please." As she poured, he couldn't help but overhear a conversation at the next table. 2 older men were discussing what they called the old Blackwood place. "Third family in 5 years to give up on it," one said, shaking his head. "They lasted, 4 months?" "Barely 3, the other replied. "Left most of their stuff behind. They were in such a hurry. Said the same thing as the others. Couldn't stand that awful humming. Like the house was alive, they said." "It's the Blackwood curse," the first man said with grim certainty. "That place will never let anyone stay." Their conversation was interrupted when a woman in her early 30s approached their table. She had short, practical brown hair and intelligent eyes behind simple glasses. She carried a notebook and a professional camera hung around her neck. "Excuse me," she said, "but I couldn't help overhearing. I'm Emma Chen from the Oak Ridge Chronicle. I'd love to hear more about this Blackwood place for a piece I'm working on." The men seemed pleased to have an audience, eagerly sharing more details about the supposedly cursed house. Gabriel found himself listening intently. A house that people fled from, a mysterious humming that drove them away. It was the kind of problem that appealed to the engineer in him. Concrete. Solvable. "Do you know who handles the property now?" Emma asked the men. "That'd be Harold Wilson, only real estate agent in town. Office is just down the street." Emma thanked them and turned to leave, her eyes meeting Gabriel's briefly. There was a moment of recognition, not that they knew each other, but that she somehow understood something about him. She nodded slightly before heading out the door. Gabriel finished his coffee, paid, and whistled softly for Ranger, who had been waiting patiently outside. Together, they walked down the main street, Gabriel's eyes drawn to a small office with a sign that read, "Oak Ridge Real Estate." Inside, a man with a kind face and a receding hairline looked up from his desk. He was Harold Wilson, the sole real estate agent in town. He offered Gabriel a weary but welcoming smile. "Passing through or looking to stay?" "Looking to stay," Gabriel replied, his own voice still rough from disuse. "If I can find the right place, something quiet away from the main road." Harold nodded slowly, sizing up the man before him. He saw the military bearing, the haunted look in his eyes and the subtle tension in his shoulders. He had seen men like Gabriel before. "Quiet, we have plenty of," the agent said, turning to a large corkboard on the wall dotted with listings. "Most folks want to be closer to town, but there are properties further out. The problem is, they often need a lot of work." He paused, then pulled a thumbtack from a faded photograph in the corner of the board, a listing that looked like it had been there for years. "And then there's this one." He handed the paper to Gabriel. It was a black and white photo of a large two-story farmhouse, its Victorian features obscured by overgrown ivy and a sagging porch. The description was blunt: foreclosed property sold as is significant repairs required. But it was the price listed at the bottom that made Gabriel's breath catch in his throat. It was impossibly low, a fraction of what even a small plot of land should cost. "The old Blackwood place," Harold said, a note of caution in his tone. "Been on the market for years. Bank just wants it off their books. People say it's got problems. Bad wiring, leaky roof, maybe a foundation issue. No one's been able to stick with it for long." Gabriel stared at the photograph. He saw past the decay, the neglect, the warnings. As a former combat engineer, he did not see a ruin. He saw a structure. He saw broken things that could be fixed. He saw a project, a long and difficult challenge that would demand all his focus, all his skill, and all his energy. He saw a mission. A mission could save a man. It could give him a reason to wake up in the morning. It could silence the ghosts, if only for a few hours at a time. He looked from the photograph through the office window to his truck, where Ranger sat patiently watching his silhouette, a promise of unwavering loyalty. "I'll take a look at it," Gabriel said, his voice firm with a sense of purpose he had not felt in years. The drive to the Blackwood property took them down a series of narrowing roads, the last of which was little more than a gravel track carved through the dense Oregon forest. Harold handled his sedan carefully, navigating the ruts and potholes with practiced ease. Gabriel followed in his truck, the realtor's words from their brief meeting echoing in his mind. "It's not just the repairs, Mr. Foster," Harold had said, his tone genuinely concerned as he gathered the paperwork. "It's the stories. The last family, the Millers, they lasted 3 months. Left in a hurry. Said the house had a hum, a sound that got under your skin. Before them, some young couple tried to flip it. They gave up after 6 weeks. Sold it back to the bank at a loss. Complained of strange noises, feelings of being watched." He sighed, tapping a pen on his desk. "People in Oak Ridge call it the curse. It's a money pit, and frankly, it spooks people. For a man on a tight budget, it's more than a risk. It's a folly." Gabriel had simply nodded, his expression unreadable. Folly. He was familiar with the term. He had been called foolish for re-enlisting, for choosing the lonely path of a career soldier. Now he was being called foolish for choosing this broken-down house. Perhaps they were right, but a soldier learned to trust his gut, and his gut told him this was the mission he needed. When they finally broke through the trees, the house stood before them in a clearing, and Gabriel felt his breath catch. The photograph had not done justice to the scale of its neglect. It was a grand old farmhouse, but it looked like a tired giant that had finally surrendered to the relentless siege of nature. Gray paint peeled from the clapboard siding in long curling strips. The porch roof sagged precariously at one corner, and several windows on the second floor were dark gaping holes where the glass had shattered. The yard was a tangled wilderness of weeds and thorny bushes choking the life out of what might have once been a beautiful garden. It was a wreck, a disaster, and it was perfect. Harold got out of his car, a grim look on his face. Well, there she is, the soldier's Folly. Gabriel parked his truck, his eyes scanning the property, not with despair, but with a cool, analytical gaze. He saw the weak points, the structural compromises, the years of decay. He also saw the strong bones beneath it all, the promise of what it could be. Ranger, sensing the shift in his master's focus, sat alert in the passenger seat, his ears twitching as he took in the new environment. As they approached the house, Gabriel noticed a small wooden sign nearly hidden by overgrowth near what had once been a garden path. Curious, he pushed aside the vegetation to reveal the name Blackwood, carved into the aging wood, along with the date 1905. Below shadow was a faded family crest showing a raven perched on a bridge. The Blackwoods were one of the founding families of Oak Ridge, Harold explained, seeing Gabriel's interest. James Blackwood built this house at the turn of the century when the timber industry was booming. His grandson Charles still runs Blackwood Timber, biggest employer in the county. Gabriel nodded, turning his attention back to the house. The front door was solid oak, weathered but intact. It opened with a protesting groan, revealing a dim interior that smelled of dust and abandonment. Inside the house was a tomb of forgotten memories. Furniture lay shrouded in white cloths like pale ghosts. Cobwebs draped from the ceilings and intricate silver chandeliers. A thick layer of dust covered every surface, preserving the house in a state of suspended animation. Gabriel moved through the downstairs rooms, his boots echoing on the hardwood floors. He ran a hand along the wall, testing the integrity of the plaster. He peered into the dark, cavernous fireplace. Despite the neglect, the craftsmanship was evident in every detail. The intricate moldings, the solid wooden banisters, the stained glass transom above the front door. Ranger stayed close to his side, his nails clicking softly on the floorboards. The dog seemed uneasy, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a tense alertness. He sniffed suspiciously at the corners of rooms, his body low to the ground. In what must have been the library, Gabriel was drawn to a wall of built-in bookshelves, their empty shelves gathering dust. On one wall hung a faded portrait of a stern-looking man with a thick beard, dressed in the formal attire of the early 1900s. James Blackwood, Gabriel presumed. There was something cold in the man's eyes, a hardness that the artist had captured, perhaps unintentionally. It was when Gabriel paused in the center of the main living area that he first felt it. It was not a sound, not at first. It was a vibration, a low-frequency thrum that seemed to rise up from the floor through the soles of his boots and into his bones. He stood perfectly still, closing his eyes, focusing all his senses as he had been trained to do. Then he heard it, a deep, resonant hum. It was faint but persistent, a steady mechanical drone that seemed to originate from deep within the earth beneath the house. It was the sound of a distant, massive engine. Ranger heard it too. The dog's ears flattened against his skull, and a low, guttural growl rumbled in his chest. He began to pace his body language, screaming of a threat he could not see. He would stop, stare intently at the floorboards, then move again, unable to settle. The hum was not just a noise. It was an intrusion, a presence that set every one of the dog's protective instincts on high alert. Gabriel watched his companion, the knot of anxiety returning to his own chest. He trusted Ranger's instincts more than his own. The dog was a finely tuned instrument, and right now he was sounding a clear alarm. Harold watched from the doorway, his expression a mixture of concern and resignation. You see what I mean? There's something not right about this place. Gabriel nodded slowly, his mind already breaking down the problem. Could be a number of things. Electrical issue, water pipes, even geological factors. I'll need to investigate. Harold looked skeptical. The Millers had 3 different contractors out here. None of them could figure it out. They weren't combat engineers, Gabriel replied simply. The paperwork was signed on the hood of Gabriel's truck. He handed over a cashier's check for the full amount, a single piece of paper that represented years of combat pay and the last of his financial security. It was a reckless gamble, a leap of faith into a project that had defeated everyone else. As Harold drove away, giving one last worried glance in his rearview mirror, Gabriel was left alone with his new home, his new mission. "Well, Ranger," he said quietly, his voice swallowed by the immense silence of the forest, "let's inspect the new barracks." The first week at the Blackwood property was a blur of methodical labor. Gabriel established a routine, a rhythm that was familiar and comforting. He worked from sunrise to sunset, fueled by coffee and a grim sense of determination. He cleared the debris from the main floor, tore out rotten floorboards, and patched the most immediate holes in the roof to keep the persistent Oregon rain at bay. Each completed task, no matter how small, was a minor victory against the overwhelming forces of decay. But through it all, the hum was his constant, unwelcome companion. It never stopped. It was a low, resonant vibration that permeated everything, a sound that seemed to exist just at the edge of hearing. During the day, the noise of his tools could almost drown it out. But in the quiet moments during a water break, or in the deep stillness of the night, it would return, a persistent reminder of the house's hidden sickness. As a combat engineer, Gabriel was a diagnostician of structural problems. He approached the mystery of the hum with the same disciplined logic he would apply to a compromised bridge or a faulty generator. First, he tackled the house's internal systems. He shut off the main water valve. The hum continued. He flipped the master circuit breaker, plunging the house into darkness. The hum remained unchanged. He inspected the ancient oil furnace in the cellar, a hulking iron beast, but it was cold and silent. The noise was not mechanical, at least not in any conventional sense. His investigation led him to the crawl space, a dark, web-choked labyrinth beneath the house. Armed with a powerful flashlight, Gabriel spent hours on his hands and knees in the damp, claustrophobic space. He examined every inch of the stone foundation, looking for cracks, for hollow spots, for anything that could explain the sound. The hum was stronger down there, vibrating through the very earth he crawled upon, but its source was maddeningly elusive. It was everywhere at once, coming from no single point. Day after day, his search yielded nothing. The logical step-by-step process that had served him so well in his military career was failing him. The mission was stalling. Frustration began to set in, a cold and familiar feeling. It gnawed at the edges of his focus, whispering doubts in the quiet of the evenings. The house, which was meant to be his sanctuary, his purpose, was beginning to feel like a trap. The unseen, unidentifiable source of the noise felt like an enemy. He could not engage in invisible pressure that was slowly wearing him down. The feeling was dangerously similar to the helplessness he'd felt in the past, a trigger for the very anxieties he had come here to escape. On the 8th day, as Gabriel was replacing a broken window in the kitchen, he heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Visitors were rare. Harold had checked in once, and a delivery truck had brought some building supplies, so Gabriel was instantly alert, his body tensing in preparation for a potential threat. Through the dirty window, he saw a modest sedan parked next to his truck. From it emerged Emma Chen, the reporter he had seen in the cafe. She wore practical clothes, jeans, hiking boots, and a waterproof jacket, and carried a canvas bag over her shoulder. She approached the house with confident strides, pausing to take in the sight of the old structure. Gabriel stepped onto the porch, wiping his hands on a rag. Ranger appeared at his side, ever vigilant. "Mr. Foster," Emma called, stopping at a respectful distance. "I'm Emma Chen from the Oak Ridge Chronicle. I was hoping to talk to you about the house." Gabriel's instinct was to send her away. He had come here for solitude, not to be the subject of a small-town newspaper article. But there was something earnest in her expression, a genuine curiosity rather than mere professional interest. "Gabriel," he corrected, his voice still gruff from lack of use. "Just Gabriel." She smiled, seemingly encouraged by this small concession. "Gabriel, then. I'm doing a series on historic properties in the area, and the Blackwood house has quite a reputation. I thought your perspective, as the new owner, might add a fresh angle." Gabriel hesitated, then nodded once, stepping aside to let her approach. Ranger watched her carefully, his posture alert but not aggressive. "Beautiful tall," Emma commented, extending her hand palm down for Ranger to sniff. "What's his name?" "Ranger," Gabriel replied, a hint of pride softening his voice. "He was my partner in Afghanistan." Military working dog. Emma's eyes widened slightly in understanding. So you were in the service. What did you do there? Combat engineer, 12 years, 3 tours. Emma nodded, not pressing for more. She seemed to understand the boundaries. And now you're taking on this place. That's quite a change. Gabriel shrugged. Not as different as you might think. It's still about identifying problems and fixing them. Like the humming? Emma asked, her head tilting slightly. I've heard stories about it from half the town. Gabriel's eyebrows rose in surprise. You know about that? It's part of the local legend, she explained. Every family that's lived here has mentioned it. Some say it's what drove them away. Gabriel considered this, then gestured toward the door. Come in if you want. See for yourself. Inside, Emma moved carefully through the half-cleared rooms, taking notes and occasionally snapping pictures with her phone. She asked thoughtful questions about the house's structure, its history, and Gabriel's plans for restoration. She seemed genuinely interested, not just gathering material for a story. When they reached the main living room, Gabriel watched as Emma paused, her head cocked slightly to one side. Do you feel that? She asked softly. Gabriel nodded. The hum. It's always there. Emma closed her eyes, concentrating. It's like a vibration more than a sound. Like standing near heavy machinery. Exactly, Gabriel confirmed, impressed by her perception. I've checked everything. Electrical, plumbing, heating. Can't find the source. Have you tried? Emma began, but was interrupted by a sudden commotion from outside. Ranger, who had been exploring the kitchen, began barking furiously. Gabriel moved quickly to the front door, his body instinctively shifting into a defensive posture. Emma followed close behind. Outside, a gleaming black luxury SUV had pulled up beside Emma's modest sedan. A man in his early 60s emerged impeccably dressed in a tailored suit despite the rural setting. His silver hair was expertly styled, and his face bore the confident expression of someone accustomed to authority. He surveyed the property with obvious distaste before his gaze settled on Gabriel and Emma. Mr. Blackwood, Emma murmured, surprise evident in her voice. You know him, Gabriel asked quietly. Charles Blackwood, grandson of the original owner. He runs Blackwood Timber, practically owns half the county. Blackwood approached it with measured steps, his expensive shoes incongruous on the gravel driveway. Ranger continued to bark, positioning himself protectively in front of Gabriel. Control your animal, Blackwood said by way of greeting, his voice cold and commanding. Gabriel placed a hand on Ranger's head, but did not restrain him further. He's just doing his job. What can I do for you, Mr. Blackwood? The older man's eyes narrowed slightly at the lack of deference. I understand you've purchased this property. That's right, Gabriel confirmed, his stance subtly shifting to one of quiet readiness, a soldier's habit in the face of potential conflict. I'm here to make you a more reasonable offer, Blackwood stated, as if announcing a foregone conclusion. This house has been a blight on the landscape for too long. The Blackwood Foundation is preparing a historical preservation initiative for the area, and we'd like to include this property. I'm prepared to offer you twice what you paid. Gabriel's expression remained neutral, but his eyes hardened. Not interested. Blackwood's composure flickered for just a moment, revealing a flash of something darker beneath the polished exterior. Mr. Foster, I don't think you understand. This house has issues, structural problems that will cost far more to fix than the property is worth. You mean the humming, Gabriel said, not a question, but a statement. A barely perceptible tension crept into Blackwood's shoulders. Local superstition. Nevertheless, the offer stands. Twice your purchase price in cash. Today. Gabriel shook his head once definitive. I appreciate the offer, but I'm not selling. Blackwood's jaw tightened, and he reached into his suit jacket, producing a business card. When you change your mind, and you will call my office. He extended the card, which Gabriel made no move to take. Emma stepped forward, accepting the card instead. I'm sure Mr. Foster will keep your offer in mind, Mr. Blackwood. For my article, would you care to comment on your family's historical connection to the property? Blackwood's gaze shifted to her, cold and dismissive. Miss Chen's still chasing stories where none exist, I see. The Blackwood family has always been dedicated to the growth and prosperity of Oak Ridge. That is the only story worth telling. He turned back to Gabriel. Think carefully about your decision, Mr. Foster. Some houses are better left to their ghosts. With that cryptic warning, he returned to his vehicle and drove away the expensive SUV, kicking up dust as it disappeared down the gravel road. Gabriel watched him go, a familiar tension building in his chest. It was the sensation he used to feel before combat, a heightened awareness that came with recognizing a threat. Ranger pressed against his legs, sensing his unease. "Well," Emma said, breaking the silence. "That was interesting. Charles Blackwood doesn't usually make house calls." Gabriel turned to her, his expression thoughtful. He seemed very interested in this place for a blight on the landscape. Emma nodded, looking down at the business card in her hand. "The Blackwoods have always been protective of their family legacy, but this feels different." She handed the card to Gabriel. "For what it's worth, I think you were right to refuse." Gabriel took the card, studying it briefly before slipping it into his pocket. "What do you know about the history of this house, about the Blackwoods?" Emma considered the question, her journalistic instincts clearly engaged. "Not as much as I'd like. The family's been here since the town was founded, but they keep their private affairs private. James Blackwood built this house in 1905, shortly after establishing the timber mill. The family lived here until the 1940s, then moved to a bigger estate closer to town." She glanced back at the house, her expression curious. "You know, the local historical society might have more information. The head of it, Eleanor Barnes, is a retired history professor. She's been documenting the area's past for years." Gabriel nodded, a new angle of investigation forming in his mind. "I'd like to meet her." "I can introduce you," Emma offered. "She's always eager to talk history with anyone who'll listen." As they spoke, Ranger suddenly grew alert, his ears perked forward. He moved away from Gabriel, trotting purposefully toward the back of the house. Gabriel watched him go, a slight frown creasing his brow. "Something wrong?" Emma asked. "Not sure," Gabriel replied. "He's been acting strange since we got here, especially into the backyard." They followed Ranger around the side of the house to the rear, where the overgrown yard gave way to a small clearing before the forest began again. The dog had stopped at a specific spot near the foundation where the ground appeared damp, despite the lack of recent rain. As they watched, Ranger began to dig with focused determination, his powerful paws sending clouds of dark earth flying. "He's been doing this for days," Gabriel explained, approaching the spot. "Always the same place. I thought he was after a mole or something." Emma crouched near the growing hole, her reporter's curiosity evident. "Dogs can sense things we can't. Water gases, even changes in electromagnetic fields." Gabriel knelt beside the hole, examining the soil Ranger had excavated. It was darker and damper than the surrounding earth, almost like mud. He reached down, pressing his palm against the ground, feeling a subtle vibration. "The humming," he murmured. "It's stronger here. Much stronger." Ranger paused in his digging to look back at Gabriel, then barked once, sharp and insistent, before returning to his task with renewed vigor. Emma watched the dog, then looked at Gabriel, a slow realization dawning in her eyes. "You don't think—" Gabriel nodded, a spark of purpose igniting within him. "Ranger isn't digging randomly. He's trying to show me something." He stood, a decision made. "I need a shovel." While Gabriel retrieved tools from his truck, Emma continued to observe Ranger, who had now dug a hole nearly a foot deep. The dog worked with single-minded purpose, occasionally stopping to press his ear against the ground, as if listening for something. When Gabriel returned with a shovel and work gloves, Ranger moved aside, watching expectantly as his master took over the excavation. Gabriel dug with methodical precision, careful not to damage whatever might lie beneath. After about 20 minutes of steady work, the shovel struck something solid. It wasn't rock or root. The impact had a different resonance. Gabriel cleared away more soil, revealing what appeared to be a large flat stone. As he exposed more of it, they could see it was roughly circular, about 3 feet in diameter. "It looks like a capstone," Emma observed, excitement coloring her voice. "Like for an old well or—" Gabriel nodded, continuing to clear the earth from around the stone's perimeter. As he worked, a trickle of clear water began to seep into the hole from beneath the stone. It wasn't rainwater or groundwater. It was flowing pressurized, finding the path of least resistance around the edge of the cap. "Not a well," Gabriel said, his engineer's mind quickly assembling the puzzle pieces. "It's a spring, an artesian spring that's been capped off." He sat back on his heels, the revelation settling over him. "The water pressure has nowhere to go. It's pushing up against the foundation of the house, causing the vibration." Emma's eyes widened in understanding. The humming, it's not supernatural or mechanical, it's geological. Ranger barked as if in agreement, his tail wagging with the satisfaction of a job well done. Gabriel stood surveying the area with new eyes. The spring must have been capped when the house was built, maybe to create a level building site. Over time, the water found a new path or the pressure increased. So what do we do? Emma asked, looking from the stone to Gabriel. Gabriel was already planning in his mind, calculating slopes and flow rates. We need to redirect the water, create a controlled channel to relieve the pressure on the foundation. He turned to Emma, a hint of a smile touching the corners of his mouth for the first time since they'd met. Want to help solve the Blackwood curse? For the next few hours, Gabriel and Emma worked side by side, expanding the excavation around the capstone. With pickaxe and shovel, they carefully removed the stone to reveal a powerful spring beneath its clear water bubbling up from deep within the earth. The sudden release caused a small geyser effect, soaking them both before Gabriel could control the flow. Together, they dug a trench leading away from the house, following the natural gradient of the land toward a low area at the edge of the property. As the water found its new path flowing freely down the channel, they had created something remarkable happen. The humming began to fade. It didn't disappear immediately, but as the pressure against the foundation gradually dissipated, the vibration lessened, the resonant frequency dying down. Within an hour, the house was silent for the first time in perhaps decades. Standing in the gathering dusk, mud-spattered and exhausted, Gabriel felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Ranger moved through the house, no longer anxious but curious, exploring rooms that were now free from the oppressive hum. "We did it," Emma said, disbelief and elation mingling in her voice. "We actually solved it." Gabriel nodded, allowing himself a moment of quiet pride. "Ranger did it," he corrected, watching his dog trot happily across the newly quiet living room. "He knew all along." Emma smiled, pulling out her phone. "This is going to make one hell of a story. Veteran and service dog solves century-old mystery. Mind if I take a few pictures?" Gabriel hesitated, his instinctive aversion to attention, warring with the undeniable sense of accomplishment. Finally, he nodded. "Just make sure Ranger gets top billing. He's the real hero here." As Emma captured images of the house, the spring, and Ranger proudly surveying his domain, Gabriel felt something he hadn't experienced in a very long time. A sense of genuine achievement, of having faced a challenge and overcome it through skill and perseverance. It wasn't the same adrenaline rush as disarming an IED or securing a hostile zone, but it was satisfying in a different, perhaps deeper way. The mission wasn't complete. The house still needed extensive repairs, but the first major obstacle had been conquered. The enemy had been identified and neutralized. Later, as they sat on the porch steps in the deepening twilight, sharing a thermos of coffee, Emma had brought Gabriel, found himself telling her about his time in Afghanistan, about the day Ranger had saved his unit from the hidden IED, about the bond that had formed between them. The words came easier than he expected, as if the silence of the house had somehow unlocked something within him as well. Emma listened without interruption, her respect evident in her attentive silence. When he finished, she simply said, "You two were meant to find this place." Gabriel looked out at the clearing, at the silver ribbon of water, now flowing peacefully from the uncapped spring, at the old house standing sentinel against the darkening sky. Maybe, he conceded, a fragile hope taking root within him. Maybe we were. As night fell completely, Emma reluctantly prepared to leave, promising to return with information from the Historical Society. Gabriel watched her car disappear down the gravel drive, a curious sense of anticipation replacing his usual relief at being alone again. Inside the house, the silence was profound, a peaceful stillness that felt like a blessing after days of the incessant hum. Gabriel spread his sleeping bag on the floor of what would eventually be the living room, Ranger settling beside him with a contented sigh. For the first time since arriving at the Blackwood house, Gabriel fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, untroubled by the ghosts that usually haunted his nights. One battle was won, but as he drifted off, a part of him sensed that the war for this house, and perhaps for his own peace, was just beginning. The next morning, Gabriel woke to sunlight streaming through the dusty windows, casting golden paths across the worn floorboards. The silence of the house felt like a physical presence, a benevolent spirit that had replaced the oppressive hum. He stretched, feeling more rested than he had in months. Ranger was already up, watching him with alert eyes, tail thumping against the floor in greeting. Gabriel smiled, running a hand through his hair. "Morning, partner. Ready for breakfast?" After a simple meal of instant coffee and protein bars, Gabriel resumed his work on the house with renewed energy. The absence of the humming seemed to have transformed the entire property, making what had once felt like an adversary into a willing patient ready to be healed. He was replacing rotted boards on the front porch when Ranger suddenly stood at attention, ears forward gazing down the driveway. A moment later, Gabriel heard the sound of an approaching vehicle. It wasn't Emma's sedan or Blackwood's luxury SUV, but an older model station wagon that had seen better days. The car parked beside his truck, and from it emerged an elderly woman, tall and straight-backed. Despite her years, she wore practical khaki pants, hiking boots, and a fleece vest over a button-up shirt. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she carried a leather messenger bag that looked as weathered as she did. This must be Eleanor Barnes, the historian Emma had mentioned. "Mr. Foster," she called as she approached, her voice strong and clear. "I'm Eleanor Barnes from the Oak Ridge Historical Society. Emma Chen told me about your discovery yesterday. Quite remarkable." Gabriel set down his tools and nodded in greeting. "Gabriel, please." Eleanor smiled, the expression warming her academic demeanor. "Gabriel, then. Emma thought you might be interested in learning more about the history of this place. I've brought some materials that might shed light on the Blackwood house and its original occupants." Gabriel gestured to the porch steps, which he had just reinforced. "Would you like to sit? I can make some coffee." "That would be lovely," Eleanor replied, settling herself on the steps with surprising agility for a woman of her age. Ranger approached her cautiously, and she extended a hand for him to sniff. "What a magnificent animal. Emma mentioned he was instrumental in your discovery." Gabriel nodded as he prepared coffee on a small camp stove. "Ranger has always had good instincts, better than mine most of the time." Eleanor accepted the mug of coffee with a grateful nod. "Animals often sense things we can't or won't." She opened her bag and removed several folders in a large leather-bound book. "Now about this house. Emma told me you uncovered an artesian spring that had been capped, causing the famous Blackwood hum. That's quite a significant find." "It was Ranger who found it," Gabriel corrected, sitting beside her. "I just did the digging." Eleanor smiled at his modesty. "Nevertheless, you've solved a mystery that has persisted for generations. The question now is, why was the spring capped in the first place?" She opened one of the folders, revealing old photographs and documents. The Blackwood house was built in 1905 by James Blackwood, who had recently established what would become Blackwood Timber. Prior to that, he was a relatively unknown figure who appeared in Oregon rather suddenly in the early 1900s. Gabriel studied a sepia-tone photograph of the house in its original glory, surrounded by neatly landscaped grounds. "He came into money suddenly." Eleanor nodded, impressed by his perception. "Indeed, according to county records, James Blackwood purchased large tracts of timberland in 1904, despite having no previous connection to the industry or apparent source of capital. Within a year, he had built both a successful mill and this house." She pulled out another photograph, this one showing a stern-faced man in formal attire, the same man from the portrait Gabriel had seen inside. James Blackwood was not a well-liked man, by all accounts shrewd in business, often ruthless, but he was undeniably successful. The timber operation he established became the economic foundation of Oak Ridge. Gabriel listened intently, his engineer's mind automatically looking for patterns for cause and effect. "And the spring, was it documented?" Eleanor shook her head. "Not officially, but I found this." She handed Gabriel a yellowed newspaper clipping from 1905. The headline read, "Natural Spring Discovered on Blackwood Property." The brief article described how workers digging the foundation for James Blackwood's new home had uncovered a vigorous artesian spring of exceptional purity. It quoted Blackwood as saying the spring would be properly managed to benefit the property. "Properly managed," Gabriel repeated by capping it completely. "So it seems," Eleanor agreed. "But why cap it rather than utilize it? Fresh spring water was a valuable resource." Gabriel considered this, his mind working through the problem. Unless he had a reason to hide it. Eleanor's eyes lit up with academic interest. "Precisely my thought. The question is, what might that reason be?" She pulled out the leather-bound book, which Gabriel now saw was an old county atlas from the early 1900s. Opening it to a marked page, she pointed to a map of the area that would become Oak Ridge. Before James Blackwood arrived, this land was mostly uninhabited except for a few scattered homesteads. "But look here." Her finger traced a blue line that ran through the property. This map shows a stream or creek running exactly where your house now stands. By the time the house was built, the watercourse had mysteriously disappeared from all official maps and documents. Gabriel studied this map, a sense of discovery building within him. He didn't just cap the spring, he diverted an entire creek to build here. That would have been a massive undertaking for a man of seemingly limited means who had just arrived in the area. Eleanor added, the implication clear in her tone. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of tires on gravel. Both turned to see a police cruiser pulling into the driveway. A stocky man in his 50s wearing the uniform of the Oak Ridge Sheriff's Department emerged from the vehicle. His expression was professionally neutral, but there was a tension in his stance that put Gabriel immediately on alert. "Sheriff Dawson," Eleanor greeted him. Her tone polite but cautious. "What brings you out this way?" "Ms. Barnes," the sheriff nodded in acknowledgement before turning his attention to Gabriel. "Mr. Foster, I'm Sheriff Robert Dawson. I understand you've been doing some excavation on the property." Gabriel stood slowly, careful to keep his movements non-threatening. Years of experience had taught him how to read potential conflict, and something about the sheriff's demeanor suggested this wasn't a casual visit. "That's right," Gabriel confirmed. "Found an old spring that was causing structural issues with the house." Sheriff Dawson's eyes narrowed slightly. "I received a complaint about unauthorized modifications to a historical property. As of last month, the Blackwood house was placed on the county's historical register, which means any structural changes require proper permits and review." Eleanor's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "That's impossible. The Historical Registry Committee hasn't approved any new properties this year." "I would know. I chair the committee." The sheriff looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "The paperwork came through the mayor's office, ma'am, signed and sealed last month." He turned back to Gabriel. "I'm going to have to ask you to cease all excavation and structural work until the proper permits are obtained." Gabriel's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. "Sheriff, the work we did yesterday was emergency mitigation. The pressurized spring was causing damage to the foundation." "I understand that, Mr. Foster, but rules are rules." The sheriff held out a formal-looking document. "This is a stop work order. You can still live here, but no more digging or structural changes until this is sorted out." Gabriel accepted the paper, scanning its contents quickly. "Who filed the complaint?" Sheriff Dawson hesitated, his discomfort more evident. "I'm not at liberty to say, but I'd advise you to be careful, Mr. Foster. The Blackwood house has a complicated history in this town." After the sheriff left, Eleanor was visibly agitated. "This is Charles Blackwood's doing. He must have used his influence with the mayor to push through the historical designation without committee approval." She shook her head in disgust. "Typical. When the Blackwoods want something, rules become remarkably flexible." Gabriel reread the stop work order, his mind already calculating workarounds. Why would he care so much about this place? It's been abandoned for years. Eleanor gathered her materials, her academic demeanor replaced by a more personal intensity. "That's what we need to find out. The Blackwoods have always been protective of their family history, but this level of interference suggests there's something specific about this property they don't want discovered." She stood, decision made. "I need to check some records at the Historical Society. There might be more information about the original construction of the house, something that explains why the spring was hidden." Gabriel nodded, folding the stop work order and putting it in his pocket. "I'll keep working on the interior. That's not covered by the order." Eleanor patted his arm encouragingly. "Don't let them intimidate you, Gabriel. What you've discovered might be more significant than we realize." She looked at Ranger, who had been watching the entire exchange with alert interest. "Keep listening to your partner there. He seems to have a sense about this place." After Eleanor left, Gabriel stood in the silent yard, the stop work order a physical manifestation of the opposition he now faced. Ranger pressed against his leg, offering wordless support. "What do you think, buddy?" Gabriel asked quietly. "What else is this old house hiding?" Ranger looked up at him, then turned his gaze toward the house, his posture alert but not anxious. Unlike his reaction to the humming, the dog didn't seem distressed by the house itself. If anything, he appeared curious, as if he too sensed there were more discoveries to be made. Gabriel scratched the dog's ears, a new determination settling over him. He had faced worse obstacles than small-town politics and wealthy adversaries. If Charles Blackwood wanted to play games with permits and historical designations, so be it. Gabriel had embarked on this mission, and he would see it through. With renewed purpose, he returned to the house, ranger at his heels. The silence that had felt so peaceful that morning now seemed charged with anticipation, as if the old structure itself was waiting for its secrets to be revealed. The following days brought a profound change to the Blackwood house. Without the persistent hum, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. The old structure no longer felt like an adversary, but rather a patient waiting to be healed. Gabriel worked methodically on the interior, tackling the electrical system first, then the plumbing. Each fixed problem was a small victory, another step toward redemption for both the house and himself. Despite the stop work order restricting exterior modifications, Gabriel found plenty to do inside. He replaced rotted floorboards, stripped decades of peeling wallpaper, and painstakingly restored the intricate woodwork that had once made the house magnificent. The physical labor was therapeutic, giving his hands purpose and his mind focus. For the first time in years, the nightmares that had plagued him since Afghanistan began to recede, replaced by dreamless sleep born of honest exhaustion. Ranger seemed equally transformed by the silence. The dog moved through the house with a new confidence, no longer alert to unseen threats, but curious, exploring every corner, as if searching for something only he could perceive. Occasionally, Gabriel would find him sitting in the library, staring intently at the wall of built-in bookshelves, head tilted as if listening. Unlike his reaction to the spring, Ranger didn't seem distressed by whatever he sensed. He was simply attentive. A week after the discovery of the spring, Emma's article appeared in the Oak Ridge Chronicle. The headline read, "Veteran in Service, Dog Solves Century-Old Mystery at Blackwood House." The piece detailed Gabriel and Ranger's discovery of the capped spring, explaining how the pressurized water had caused the famous Blackwood hum that had driven away previous occupants. Emma had written it with a keen eye for human interest, focusing on the unique bond between Gabriel and Ranger, while also raising questions about why the spring had been capped in the first place. The article turned Gabriel into something of a local celebrity, an unwelcome development for a man who valued his privacy. People began driving by the house, slowing to take pictures. Some even stopped to offer help or bring food gestures that left Gabriel both touched and uncomfortable. He wasn't used to being seen as anything other than a soldier, certainly not as some kind of local hero. One evening, as Gabriel sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the Oregon sky in shades of amber and purple, a battered pickup truck pulled into the driveway. From it emerged a weathered man in his 60s, dressed in worn work clothes, his face lined with decades of outdoor labor. He approached with the cautious respect of someone who understood boundaries. "Name's Frank Miller," the man said, removing his cap. "Run the hardware store in town. Brought you these." He held out a paper bag. "Some specialty fixtures for these old Victorian places. Hard to find nowadays." Gabriel accepted the bag, surprised by the gesture. "Thank you. What do I owe you?" Frank shook his head. "Nothing. Consider it a welcome to Oak Ridge." He hesitated, then added, "My father worked for Blackwood Timber his whole life. Said James Blackwood was a hard man but fair. Built this town from nothing." His eyes moved to the house. "Always wondered about this place. Glad to see someone fixing it up right." After Frank left, Gabriel examined the antique brass fixtures, perfect matches for the house's original hardware. It was a thoughtful gift, but more than that, it was an acceptance. For the first time since arriving in Oak Ridge, Gabriel felt like something other than an outsider. The next morning, Eleanor Barnes returned her station wagon loaded with books and file boxes. Her eyes sparkled with the excitement of academic discovery as she pulled into the driveway. "I've been researching," she announced, barely waiting for Gabriel to invite her in. "You won't believe what I found." Inside, Eleanor spread her materials across the kitchen table, the only furniture Gabriel had purchased so far. Ranger settled nearby, watching the proceedings with interest, his intelligent amber eyes following Eleanor's movements. "After our conversation, I went digging through the Historical Society archives," Eleanor explained, her voice animated with discovery. "I found references to James Blackwood before he arrived in Oregon. He appears in newspaper accounts from California during the early 1900s, but under a different name, James Reed." She produced a photocopied newspaper article from 1902. The headline read, "Bank Manager Reed Disappears with Funds." The article described how a James Reed manager of a small bank in Northern California had vanished overnight along with a significant sum of money from the bank's reserves. The description matches, Eleanor pointed out, tapping the article with a well-manicured finger. Height, build, eye color. And look at this. She placed a grainy photograph next to the article. It showed a younger version of the man from the portrait inside the house, though, without the distinctive beard. You think James Blackwood was this bank manager who stole money? Gabriel asked, studying the evidence with his engineer's precision. Eleanor nodded, her silver hair catching the morning light. It would explain his sudden wealth and the name change. The timing fits perfectly. James Reed disappears in 1902, and James Blackwood appears in Oregon in 1904, flushed with cash and ready to establish a timber empire. Gabriel considered this his analytical mind processing the implications. So he stole the money, changed his name, and used the funds to start a new life here. But what does that have to do with capping the spring? Eleanor's expression grew more animated. That's where it gets interesting. I also found this. She pulled out an old map different from the one she'd shown before. This is a geological survey map from 1890. It shows not just the creek on the property, but also indicates a natural spring, specifically a mineral spring with unusual properties. She pointed to a notation in the margin. Anomalous water samples retained for further study. Iron-rich water, Gabriel murmured, his mind connecting the dots. That could explain the reddish soil we found around the spring. Exactly, Eleanor confirmed. But here's the fascinating part. In the early 1900s, there was considerable interest in mineral springs for their supposed medicinal properties. People would travel great distances to take the waters at famous springs. It was big business, with entire resorts built around these natural features. You think Blackwood or Reed was hiding the spring to prevent its discovery? Gabriel asked, leaning forward over the table. It's possible, Eleanor said, adjusting her glasses. A known mineral spring would have attracted attention, visitors, perhaps even development. For a man hiding from his past under a new identity, that would have been disastrous. The pieces were beginning to fit together, but Gabriel sensed there was still something missing. It seems extreme to cap a spring and build a house on top of it just to keep it hidden. There must be more to it. Eleanor nodded, pleased by his perception. My thoughts exactly, which is why I've arranged for us to meet someone this afternoon who might be able to fill in the gaps. Patrick Barnes, my nephew. He's a geologist with the State University specializing in groundwater systems. I've asked him to take a look at your spring. Later that day, Patrick Barnes arrived. A man in his 40s with his aunt's intelligent eyes and methodical approach, though lacking her warmth. After examining the spring and collecting water samples, he joined Gabriel and Eleanor in the kitchen, his movements precise and economical. Definitely unusual, Patrick confirmed, holding a test tube of the spring water up to the light. High mineral content, particularly iron and sulfur, but I'd need to run more comprehensive tests to determine if there's anything truly exceptional about it. Could the water have medicinal properties, as was believed in Blackwood's time? Eleanor asked, ever the historian. Patrick shrugged, the gesture dismissive. Many mineral springs were claimed to have healing powers in that era, though most such claims were exaggerated or entirely fabricated. But this water does have an unusual composition. I'd like to analyze it further. There's something else, Gabriel said, a new thought forming. The house was built in 1905, right at the height of the mineral spring craze. What if Blackwood wasn't just hiding the spring? What if he was exploiting it? Eleanor's eyes widened with realization. Bottling the water, perhaps, selling it privately. It would have been a lucrative side business. Patrick agreed, his skepticism momentarily set aside. But if that were the case, there should be some evidence. Equipment bottles, advertisements. Gabriel thought for a moment, then turned to Ranger. The dog had been listening to their conversation with unusual intensity. His ears perked forward, body perfectly still. What do you think, boy? Is there something else we're missing? As if in response, Ranger stood and trotted purposefully toward the library, stopping at the entrance to look back at them expectantly, his tail giving a single determined wag. He wants us to follow, Gabriel said, rising from his chair. In the library, Ranger approached the wall of built-in bookshelves, the same wall he had shown interest in for days. The dog sat directly in front of it, looking up at Gabriel with clear intent, then pressed his ear against the wood as if listening to something beyond. Gabriel examined the bookshelves closely for the first time. They spanned the entire wall from floor to ceiling, their once elegant craftsmanship now dulled by decades of neglect. Unlike the other walls in the house, this one had no windows or exterior doors. It was entirely internal, unbroken by any architectural feature. These shelves, Gabriel said slowly, running his hand along the polished wood, they're built directly against the wall, not just mounted on it. That's unusual for a house this age. He ran his hand along the edge of one shelf, feeling the junction where it met the wall. Something about the dimensions nagged at him, a discrepancy his engineer's mind couldn't ignore. Eleanor watched him curious. "What are you thinking?" "When I first inspected the house," Gabriel explained, stepping back to take in the entire wall, "I noticed the exterior measurements don't quite match the interior rooms. I assumed it was just the thickness of the walls. But now I'm wondering." He stepped back, surveying the entire wall. "Patrick, do you have a tape measure?" Patrick produced one from his pocket, and Gabriel took careful measurements of the library, then of the adjacent rooms. He compared the numbers, calculating in his head, his expression growing more focused with each comparison. "There's a discrepancy," he announced finally. "About 5 feet between this wall and where the exterior wall should be based on the overall dimensions of the house." He looked at Ranger, who was watching him with apparent approval. "There's a space behind these bookshelves." Eleanor gasped softly, her academic curiosity fully engaged. "A hidden room?" Gabriel nodded, already examining the bookshelves for a mechanism. "Common in houses of this era, especially for someone with secrets to keep." His fingers probed the ornate woodwork, searching for anything unusual, any detail out of place. In the corner of one shelf, partially hidden by an elaborate carving of a raven, he found a small metal lever disguised as part of the decoration. Gabriel hesitated, then pulled it gently. With a soft click, a section of the bookshelf shifted slightly forward. Gabriel grasped the edge and pulled, revealing that what had appeared to be a solid wall of shelves was actually a door perfectly concealed within the built-in cabinetry. Behind it lay darkness, and the cool, damp smell of a space long sealed, a musty combination of old paper, metal, and something else. Something chemical. Gabriel retrieved his flashlight from his tool belt and shined it into the opening. The beam revealed a narrow room about 5 feet deep and running the length of the library wall. It was filled with dusty shelves containing hundreds of glass bottles, their contents long dried up. Against the far wall stood an antique filtering system, copper pipes running from a sealed cistern into a series of glass chambers. "A bottling operation, sir," Eleanor breathed, peering over Gabriel's shoulder. "You were right." They entered the hidden room, carefully mindful of the fragile artifacts that had remained untouched for decades. The bottles were elegantly designed with embossed labels reading, "Blackwood Elixir, Nature's Finest Remedy." Each bore the image of a raven perched on a bridge, the same symbol Gabriel had seen on the sign outside the house. "He was selling the spring water as medicine," Patrick observed, examining one of the bottles with professional interest. "Pretty common scam in those days. Mineral water marketed as a cure-all for everything from arthritis to women's troubles." Gabriel continued exploring the narrow room, his flashlight beam revealing more details. At the far end stood a small desk, its surface covered with ledgers and papers frozen in time, as if their owner had just stepped away. Gabriel approached it, drawn by the promise of answers. The topmost ledger was a record of sales showing substantial revenues from the Blackwood elixir over several years. The customer list included wealthy individuals from across the country, many ordering cases of the water at premium prices. Some names were familiar, even a century later. Industrial magnates, politicians, even a few Hollywood stars of the silent film era. Beneath the ledger lay a leather-bound journal. Gabriel opened it carefully, the brittle pages crackling with age. It was a personal diary, written in a precise, controlled hand. The first entry was dated May 12, 1904. "Established in Oregon at last. The property secured construction to begin forthwith. The locals suspect nothing of my past. Here I am, James Blackwood, timber baron and respectable businessman. The spring will provide the additional income needed until the mill begins to show profit. Fortune favors the bold." Gabriel turned the pages, reading entries that documented Blackwood's double life, respectable businessman by day, seller of medicinal spring water by night. The operation was kept secret, the journal explained, to prevent competitors from discovering the source of the miraculous water. But as Gabriel read further, the entries took a darker turn. An entry from 1908 caught his attention. L continues to threaten exposure, claims to have recognized me from the California incident, demands payment for silence. I have worked too hard to build my empire to allow such parasites to bleed me dry. A more permanent solution may be necessary. Eleanor, reading over his shoulder, gasped. L must be Luther Wallace. He was a business rival of Blackwood's who disappeared mysteriously in 1908. It was ruled a hunting accident, but there were always rumors. Gabriel continued reading the journal, revealing a pattern of ruthlessness and deception. Blackwood had used the profits from his water business to expand his timber operations, often through questionable means. The journal detailed bribes to officials, threats to competitors, and the systematic exploitation of workers. One of the final entries, dated 1931, was particularly disturbing. The Depression has strained even my resources. The bank threatens foreclosure on several properties. Cannot allow this to happen. The special reserve supply will fetch a high price among my wealthy clients. What they don't know about its true source will not harm them. After all, one spring is much like another. Patrick, who had been examining the filtering system, called out, Gabriel, you need to see this. At the back of the hidden room, Patrick had discovered a second door, smaller and more crudely constructed than the first. It opened to reveal a rough stone staircase leading down into darkness, the steps worn smooth by years of use. Where do you think it goes? Eleanor asked, peering down the stairs, her voice echoing slightly in the confined space. Only one way to find out, Gabriel replied, adjusting his flashlight. He turned to Ranger. Stay here, buddy. The dog whined in protest but obeyed, watching anxiously as Gabriel descended the stairs, followed by Patrick and Eleanor, their footsteps echoing against the stone walls. The staircase led to a small underground chamber carved directly into the bedrock beneath the house. The space was dominated by a circular stone well, its interior glistening with moisture. Copper pipes, green with verdigris, connected the well to the filtering system above. The air here was cooler, heavy with mineral scents, and something else, a subtle but distinct chemical odor. This must be where he accessed the spring directly, Patrick said, examining the well with professional interest. The main spring we uncovered outside feeds this secondary access point. Ingenious setup for the time. Gabriel shined his light into the well. The water level was low, but the surface shimmered with an oily iridescence that was immediately concerning. That doesn't look right, he observed, instinctively stepping back. Patrick knelt by the well, careful not to touch the water. No, it doesn't, he sniffed cautiously. There's a chemical smell, not just minerals. He looked up at Gabriel, his expression grave. I need to test this immediately. If he was adding something to the water. A sudden noise from above interrupted him, the sound of breaking glass followed by Ranger barking furiously, the deep protective bark Gabriel recognized from their days in combat. Someone's in the house, Gabriel said, already moving toward the stairs. His combat instincts took over, body shifting into a defensive posture as he ascended rapidly but silently, years of training, making the movement fluid and natural. At the top of the stairs, Gabriel paused, listening. Ranger's barks had changed to growls coming from the direction of the library. He motioned for the others to stay back, then moved cautiously through the hidden bottling room toward the entrance. Through the partially open bookshelf door, Gabriel could see Ranger standing rigid facing the library entrance, his hackles raised and teeth bared. Beyond him stood a man Gabriel had never seen before. Tall, thin, with the same silver hair and sharp features as Charles Blackwood, but younger perhaps, in his late 40s. He wore an expensive suit that seemed out of place in the dusty old house, and carried a leather briefcase that looked like it cost more than most people's monthly salary. Call off your dog, the man said, his voice cool and controlled. I'm not here to cause trouble. Gabriel stepped into the library, positioning himself beside Ranger, one hand resting reassuringly on the dog's head. Who are you, Thomas Blackwood? The man replied. His posture relaxed despite Ranger's continued growling. Charles's son, and you must be Gabriel Foster, the man who's caused quite a stir in our little town. His eyes moved to the open bookshelf door, widening slightly. I see you've been exploring, found some of great-grandfather's secrets, have you? Some, Gabriel acknowledged cautiously, his body still positioned to react if necessary. What do you want? Thomas smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. The same thing my father wanted. For you to sell this property and move on, though I'm prepared to be more understanding about your attachment to the place. He opened his briefcase and removed a thick envelope. Inside is an offer significantly more generous than my father's. Enough to buy any house you want anywhere in the country and restore it to your heart's content. Gabriel made no move to take the envelope. Why is this house so important to your family? Thomas's smile faltered slightly, a crack in his polished veneer. Sentiment, perhaps. It was our family's first home in Oak Ridge. He glanced again at the hidden room. Though I see you've discovered there may be more to it than that. Eleanor and Patrick had emerged from the hidden staircase, hanging back but listening intently. Thomas acknowledged them with a nod, his composure quickly restored. Dr. Barnes, a pleasure as always. Still digging into old stories, I see. His tone was polite but dismissive. And you must be her nephew, the geologist. Come to test the famous Blackwood spring water, no doubt. Patrick stepped forward, holding up a small vial of the water from the underground well. Actually, yes. I'm very interested in its composition, particularly any additives that might have been introduced. Thomas's expression hardened momentarily before he regained his composure. The mineral content of the spring has always been unusual. A family curiosity, nothing more. Strange that your family would go to such lengths to keep it hidden then, Gabriel observed, watching Thomas's reactions carefully. First capping the main spring, then building a secret access point in a hidden bottling operation. Entrepreneurial ventures from a different era, Thomas said dismissively, waving a hand. Hardly relevant today. Unless those ventures involved fraud, Eleanor interjected, her academic detachment replaced by moral certainty. Selling adulterated water as medicine would have been a serious crime even in 1905. Ancient history, Thomas replied, his tone cooling, and unprovable allegations. He turned back to Gabriel. My offer stands for 24 hours. After that, things become more complicated. He placed the envelope on a nearby table. I suggest you consider it carefully. After Thomas left, the tension in the room had dissipated slightly. Gabriel opened the envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for 5 times what he had paid for the house, along with documents transferring ownership to the Blackwood Foundation. That's a lot of money, Patrick observed, eyeing the check. Too much for a house they claim has only sentimental value, Gabriel replied, setting the envelope aside. They're worried about what we found. Eleanor nodded in agreement. The journal alone contains evidence of multiple crimes, fraud, possibly murder. Even after all these years, it could seriously damage the Blackwood reputation. It's more than that, Patrick said, holding up the vial of water. They're worried about what's in this water, and so am I. I need to get this to my lab immediately. After Patrick left with the water sample, Eleanor helped Gabriel photograph each page of the journal, creating a digital record in case anything happened to the original. The work took hours, the fragile pages requiring careful handling and perfect lighting to capture the faded ink. What will you do about Thomas's offer? Eleanor asked, as they finished, her voice carefully neutral. Gabriel looked around at the library, at the hidden room beyond, at Ranger sleeping peacefully by the door. This house has been hiding secrets for over a century. I'm not going to be the one who walks away before they're revealed. That night, unable to sleep, Gabriel sat on the porch steps, the envelope with Thomas's offer beside him. Ranger lay at his feet, alert despite the late hour, his ears occasionally twitching at sounds from the forest. The sound of an approaching vehicle drew their attention. Headlights appeared on the gravel road, but instead of turning into the driveway, the car stopped at the edge of the property. Gabriel watched as a figure emerged and made its way cautiously toward the house. As the visitor drew closer, Gabriel recognized Emma Chen carrying her camera in a small backpack. Ranger relaxed, recognizing her as well, his tail thumping softly against the porch boards. Sorry for the late visit, Emma said as she reached the porch, her breath misting slightly in the cool night air. I got your message about the hidden room. Had to finish the evening edition before I could get away. Her eyes were bright with excitement despite the late hour. Show me everything. Gabriel led her through the house to the library, explaining their discoveries as they went. Emma took photographs of the hidden room, the bottling equipment, and the staircase leading to the underground well, her journalistic instincts clearly engaged. This is incredible, she said, examining one of the Blackwood elixir bottles with reverent hands. The story writes itself. Respected town founder secretly selling snake oil from a hidden spring. It might be worse than that, Gabriel told her, his voice grave. Patrick thinks something was added to the water. Something that shouldn't have been there. Emma's journalistic instincts visibly sharpened, her posture straightening. What kind of something? We don't know yet. He's testing it. Gabriel showed her the journal entries about the special reserve supply during the Depression. Blackwood was desperate for money. He might have adulterated the water to make it seem more medicinal. Emma took detailed notes, her expression growing more serious with each revelation. If there was something harmful in that water, and he knowingly sold it as medicine, she looked up at Gabriel, the implications clear in her eyes. People could have been hurt, or worse. That's what the Blackwoods are afraid of. Gabriel agreed, running a hand through his hair. Scandal like that would destroy their family legacy even a century later. They continued exploring the hidden room, Emma documenting everything with her camera, the flash illuminating decades of dust and secrets. In a dusty corner, she discovered a metal box tucked behind some empty bottles. It was locked, but the old mechanism yielded easily to Gabriel's tools. Inside lay hundreds of letters, correspondence from customers of the Blackwood elixir. Many expressed gratitude for the miraculous cures they had experienced. Others complained of unusual symptoms after consuming the water, demanding refunds or threatening legal action. Most disturbing were the response drafts penned by James Blackwood himself, dismissing complaints and denying any connection between the water and the reported symptoms. Some letters contained thinly veiled threats against those who persisted in their claims, suggesting legal action or public ridicule. He knew, Emma whispered, reading through the correspondence, her face pale in the dim light. He knew there was something wrong with the water, and he kept selling it anyway. The evidence was damning but still circumstantial, without knowing exactly what had been in the water. They needed Patrick's test results to confirm their suspicions. As if summoned by their thoughts, Gabriel's phone rang. It was Patrick, his voice tight with urgency. "I've analyzed the water," he said without preamble. "Gabriel, it's toxic. High levels of arsenic far beyond what would occur naturally. Someone deliberately added it to the water." Gabriel put the phone on speaker so Emma could hear. "Why would anyone add arsenic to spring water they were selling as medicine?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. In small doses, arsenic was actually used as a treatment for various ailments in the early 1900s. Patrick explained, his academic detachment momentarily pierced by genuine outrage. It was believed to be beneficial in controlled amounts, but the concentration in this water is dangerous, potentially lethal with prolonged consumption. Emma leaned toward the phone, her reporter's instincts fully engaged. Could Blackwood have been poisoning people intentionally? It's possible he started with medicinal doses and increased the concentration over time, Patrick replied after a moment's consideration. The journal mentioned a special reserve during the Depression. He might have added more arsenic to make the water seem more potent, more medicinal, so people who thought they were buying health were actually drinking poison. And based on the customer letters you found, some of them were getting sick. Gabriel said, the full horror of it sinking in his combat-hardened stomach, turning at the thought. Exactly, Patrick confirmed. And based on the customer letters, you found some of them were getting sick. Blackwood must have known. After ending the call, Gabriel and Emma sat in stunned silence, surrounded by the evidence of James Blackwood's deadly deception. The respected founder of Oak Ridge, the man whose name adorned the town's main street, and whose descendants still wielded enormous influence, had been a fraud, a thief, and possibly a murderer. This changes everything, Emma finally had said, closing her notebook. The Blackwoods aren't just protecting their reputation, they're covering up crime. Gabriel nodded, his decision regarding Thomas's offer now crystal clear. We need to make this public. All of it. Emma's reporter instincts were in full force. I'll write the article tonight. We'll need to move quickly before the Blackwoods can interfere. As they gathered the most crucial evidence, the journal, the customer letters, photographs of the hidden room, a noise outside caught their attention. Ranger was on his feet instantly, a low growl building in his throat. Gabriel moved to the window, peering cautiously through the glass. In the moonlight, he could make out two figures moving stealthily around the perimeter of the house, their movements purposeful and predatory. Someone's out there, he whispered to Emma. Get everything into your car. I'll create a distraction. Emma nodded quickly, packing the evidence into her backpack. Gabriel led her to the back door, watching as she slipped out into the darkness, heading for her car parked on the road. Once she was clear, Gabriel returned to the front of the house, Ranger at his side. The intruders were now on the porch, one of them working on the lock of the front door, the metal tools gleaming dully in the moonlight. Gabriel threw the door open, suddenly startling the men. They were large, rough-looking individuals dressed in dark clothing. One held a crowbar, the other a duffel bag. "Can I help you?" Gabriel asked, his voice dangerously calm. Ranger stood beside him, teeth bared in silent warning, muscles tensed for action. The men exchanged glances, clearly not expecting a confrontation. "Just checking the property," one mumbled unconvincingly. "Heard there might be structural issues?" At midnight with a crowbar, Gabriel's military training had kicked in, his body positioned for potential combat weight, balanced perfectly. "I suggest you leave. Now." The men seemed to consider their options, eyeing Gabriel and the growling German shepherd. Finally, they backed away, retreating to a pickup truck parked down the road, the engine roaring to life as they sped away. Gabriel watched them go, a cold certainty settling over him. The Blackwoods weren't just making offers anymore. They were taking action. The discovery of the poisoned water had raised the stakes dramatically. Inside, Gabriel quickly packed his essential belongings and Ranger's things. Emma had the evidence, but he couldn't risk staying in the house tonight. The intruders might return with reinforcements, and next time they might not be so easily deterred. As he loaded his truck, Gabriel's phone rang again. It was Eleanor, her voice thick with concern. "Gabriel, someone broke into the Historical Society office tonight. They took all the materials related to the Blackwood house, including the copies we made of the documents." Gabriel gripped the phone tighter. "Are you all right?" "Yes, thank goodness I wasn't there, but Gabriel, this means they're serious. They're trying to erase the evidence." "I know," Gabriel replied grimly. "They sent men to the house too, but they're too late. Emma has everything, the journal, the letters, photographs. She's writing the story tonight." Eleanor's relief was audible. "Thank goodness, but you should not stay there, Gabriel. It's not safe." "Already packing," he assured her. "Ranger and I are leaving now." After ending the call, Gabriel finished loading his truck. As he was about to leave, headlights appeared on the gravel road again. He tensed, prepared for another confrontation, but relaxed when he recognized Emma's sedan. She hurried toward him, her expression urgent. "They're blocking the road," she reported breathlessly. "Two trucks parked across the only way out. I barely managed to turn around and get back here." Gabriel processed this information quickly. "They're trying to trap us here, probably waiting for reinforcements. By morning, they'll have had time to fabricate some legal pretext to seize everything in the house." "We need another way out," Emma said, looking around at the dense forest surrounding the property, her determination undimmed by the threat. Gabriel studied the darkness beyond the yard, his military training offering a solution. "There's an old logging road about half a mile through the woods. I spotted it when I was checking the property boundaries. It's overgrown, but my truck can handle it. But they'll see us leaving, hear the engines." Emma pointed out, ever practical. Gabriel smiled grimly. "Not if they're distracted." He outlined his plan quickly. Emma would create a diversion at the front of the property while Gabriel took the evidence and Ranger through the woods to his truck, which he would position at the back of the property, lights off. Once clear, Emma would double back through the woods to meet them. The plan worked with military precision. Emma drove to the front gate, honking her horn and flashing her lights, drawing the attention of the men waiting on the main road. They converged on her car, allowing Gabriel to slip away unseen with Ranger and the backpack of evidence. Navigating through the dark forest was challenging, but Gabriel's combat training had prepared him for far worse conditions. Ranger led the way, his keen senses guiding them through the tangled undergrowth. They reached the overgrown logging road without incident, and Gabriel retrieved his truck from where he had hidden it earlier. With the headlights off, he slowly maneuvered the vehicle down the narrow, rutted path. Meanwhile, Emma had kept the men occupied with demands to know why they were blocking a public road, recording their evasive answers on her phone, and threatening to call the sheriff. When they finally moved to physically remove her from her car, she sped away, leading them on a brief chase before doubling back and cutting through the woods to the rendezvous point. Gabriel was waiting, engine idling, when she emerged from the trees. She slid into the passenger seat, breathing hard, but exhilarated. "They'll figure it out soon," she said as Gabriel accelerated down the logging road, now far enough away to risk turning on the headlights. "They'll search the property and realize we're gone." Gabriel nodded, hand steady on the wheel as the truck bounced over the uneven terrain. "By then, we'll be long gone." "Where to?" Emma checked her watch. "The Chronicle office. I can write the story tonight and we can publish first thing in the morning. Once it's public, they can't suppress it." "And after that?" Gabriel asked, glancing at her. Emma's expression was determined, the fire of journalistic purpose burning in her eyes. After that, we take it to the state police. This goes beyond a small-town scandal. Arsenic poisoning, breaking, and entering intimidation, these are serious crimes past and present. Gabriel considered this, then nodded. His mission had evolved from restoring a house to uncovering the truth. And like any good soldier, he would see it through to the end. As they drove through the quiet Oregon night, Ranger settled in the narrow space behind the seats, his vigilant eyes watching the road behind them. The backpack, containing a century of secrets, sat securely between them, its contents about to change the fate of an entire town. By dawn, Emma had finished her article, a comprehensive expose detailing James Blackwood's criminal past, the poisoned elixir business, and the efforts of his descendants to conceal the truth. She included scanned images of the journal entries and customer letters, along with photographs of the hidden room and bottling operation. The evidence was irrefutable. The story was explosive. While Emma finalized the layout for the special edition, Gabriel made a crucial phone call. Not to the local sheriff, who was clearly under Blackwood influence, but to a state police detective he had been referred to by Eleanor, a woman known for her incorruptibility and determination. By noon, the Chronicle's special edition was on newsstands throughout Oak Ridge and the surrounding communities. By evening, state police investigators had arrived at the Blackwood house, securing the property as a potential crime scene. Thomas Blackwood was brought in for questioning regarding the break-in and intimidation attempts. Charles Blackwood issued a statement denying any knowledge of his grandfather's actions, claiming the artifacts found in the house were unknown to the current generation of the family. But the most surprising development came from an unexpected source. Victoria Blackwood, Charles's daughter and Thomas's sister, came forward with additional evidence. Financial records she had discovered in her father's private safe, showing that the family had been quietly tracking down and monitoring descendants of the elixir's customers for decades. "I always knew there was something my father and brother were hiding," she told investigators. "Something about our family's past that was never discussed. When I saw the article this morning, it all made sense." Victoria's testimony sent shockwaves through Oak Ridge. Within hours, news vans from Portland and Seattle lined the town's main street, their satellite dishes raised like strange mechanical flowers. Reporters swarmed the quaint businesses, interviewing longtime residents about the Blackwood family and their century of influence. The town that had always existed in peaceful obscurity now found itself thrust into an unwelcome spotlight, its foundation shaken by revelations that threatened to rewrite its entire history. Gabriel watched the unfolding media storm from the relative peace of Eleanor's lakeside cabin. Ranger lay at his feet, seemingly unbothered by the chaos they had unleashed, his gray-white coat gleaming in the pale morning light filtering through the windows. Emma had remained at the police station, coordinating with her editor as follow-up stories poured in from across the state. The Blackwood scandal was no longer just local news. It had become a national story of generational fraud, poisoned water, and a powerful family's century-long cover-up. "The governor has ordered an investigation," Eleanor announced, setting down her phone, her voice carrying both academic interest and genuine concern. "The state health department is reviewing death records from the early 1900s through the 1950s, looking for patterns that might be linked to arsenic poisoning. They're assembling a team of toxicologists and epidemiologists to assess the potential scale of the harm caused." Gabriel nodded, gazing out at the lake's placid surface, which reflected the surrounding pines in perfect symmetry. "What about the current Blackwoods, Charles and Thomas?" "According to Victoria, they have retreated to their estate outside of town. The company's board of directors has called an emergency meeting." Eleanor's expression darkened. This town was built on Blackwood money. If the company collapses, the economic impact would be devastating. The timber mill employs almost half the working population. The ripple effects would touch every business in Oak Ridge. Gabriel understood the implication. Like many small timber towns in the Pacific Northwest, Oak Ridge's economy was precariously balanced on a single industry. The revelation of the family's dark past could devastate not just the Blackwoods themselves, but the entire community, a community that was innocent of the original crimes but would nonetheless suffer for them. "I need to get back to the house," Gabriel said, rising from his chair, his decision made. "There might be more evidence there, something we missed that could help clarify exactly who knew what and when." Eleanor looked skeptical, concern etching deeper lines into her already weathered face. "Is that wise? The Blackwoods might blame you for all this." You could be in danger, especially with Thomas. He struck me as a man who doesn't handle threats to his position well. The truth is already out. Gabriel replied, his military pragmatism asserting itself. Besides, the house is still mine and I have unfinished business there. He glanced at Ranger, who had risen and now stood attentively beside him, sensing his master's resolve. His mind returned to Ranger's persistent interest in the library wall. They had discovered the hidden bottling room, but something told Gabriel there was more to find. His years as a combat engineer had taught him to trust his instincts, and Ranger's even more. The dog had an uncanny ability to sense things beyond human perception, a gift that had saved Gabriel's life more than once in Afghanistan. With reluctance, Eleanor agreed to drive him back. They took a circuitous route, avoiding the main roads where media and curious onlookers might recognize them. The forest pressed close to the narrow back roads towering Douglas firs, creating a green tunnel that occasionally opened to reveal glimpses of mountains in the distance. Oregon's beauty remained untouched by human scandal. Gabriel thought a reminder that some things endured beyond the brief span of human affairs. As they approached the property, Gabriel was relieved to see no vehicles parked nearby. The Blackwood house stood silent in the afternoon light, looking somehow different now that its secrets were exposed, less threatening, perhaps, but more melancholy. Its weathered facade seemed to carry the weight of a century's worth of deception, the windows staring out like tired eyes that had seen too much. "I'll come back this evening," Eleanor said, as Gabriel and Ranger exited her station wagon. "Be careful, Gabriel. Don't take unnecessary risks. This story has already had enough victims." He nodded, then watched her drive away before turning to face the house. Ranger was already trotting toward the front door, eager to resume their investigation, his powerful muscles rippling beneath his coat. The dog seemed to understand the importance of their mission with an almost human comprehension. Inside the Blackwood house, Gabriel found the state police had been thorough but respectful. Evidence markers dotted the hidden room and bottling operation, but otherwise the property remained as he had left it. The silence felt different now. Not the eerie absence of the hum, but the quiet that comes after truth has broken through decades of deception. Ranger moved purposefully through the house, sniffing and examining corners with renewed interest. Gabriel watched him, trusting the dog's instincts that had already uncovered so much. After a methodical sweep of the downstairs, Ranger returned to the library, sitting once again before the bookshelf wall that had concealed the secret room. "What is it, boy?" Gabriel asked, kneeling beside his companion. "We found the room. What else are you looking for?" Ranger whined softly, pawing at a specific section of the floor near the bookshelves. The wooden planks looked identical to the surrounding floor, but Gabriel had learned to trust the dog's perception over his own. He ran his hands carefully over the area, feeling for irregularities that might be invisible to the eye. Near the corner, his fingers detected a subtle difference in texture. The wood here was newer than the surrounding floor, though carefully aged to match. The craftsmanship was expert, but now that he knew what to look for, Gabriel could see the nearly imperceptible difference in the grain pattern, a rectangular section about 3 feet wide. With his pocket knife, he probed the edges of the rectangular section, eventually finding a small indentation that allowed him to lift the entire panel. Beneath lay a small compartment, and within it, a metal lockbox. The box was heavy, made of solid steel with a complex lock mechanism. Gabriel examined it carefully, noting the absence of rust or corrosion. Unlike the other artifacts in the hidden room, this had been deliberately protected from the elements, perhaps oiled and maintained periodically. The lock itself was of modern design, perhaps 20 or 30 years old. "Recent," Gabriel murmured to himself, "much more recent than James Blackwood's time. Someone has been accessing this room within the last few decades." He carried the box to the kitchen table and retrieved his tools. The lock was sophisticated but not impenetrable to someone with Gabriel's specialized training. After 15 minutes of careful manipulation, testing each tumbler with practiced precision, it yielded with a satisfying click that echoed in the silent house. Inside lay a leather-bound volume similar to James Blackwood's journal, but in much better condition. The first entry was dated January 15, 1952, nearly 50 years after the original journal began. The handwriting was different, more modern, but with the same meticulous precision that seemed to be a family trait across generations. "My grandfather's sins have become my inheritance." The first entry began. "Today, I received the results of Elizabeth's secret water testing. The rumors were true. The elixir contains arsenic at levels far exceeding safety. Grandfather must have known. Father too, perhaps. All those people over all those years. The weight of this knowledge is almost unbearable. What am I to do with such a poisonous legacy? Gabriel turned the pages slowly, reading the private confessions of Edward Blackwood, Charles's father. The journal documented his discovery of the family's poisonous legacy and his agonizing decision to continue the deception. Unlike James, who had written with cold calculation, Edward's entries vibrated with moral conflict and genuine distress. To reveal the truth now would destroy everything, one entry read. Not just the family name, but the entire town that depends on us. 300 families would lose their livelihoods overnight. The Blackwood name would become synonymous with death and deception. I have shut down the bottling operations, sealed the underground access. The spring will remain capped, the room hidden. No one else needs suffer, but God help me, I cannot bring myself to expose what came before. The debt remains unpaid, the scales unbalanced. The entries continued through the decades, revealing Edward's internal struggle and his increasingly desperate efforts to conceal the family secret while battling his own conscience. He documented nightmares, bouts of heavy drinking, and periods of deep depression, a man haunted by knowledge he couldn't share but couldn't escape. The final pages, however, contained a shocking revelation. In 1978, Edward had commissioned a private investigator to track down the families of known elixir customers. Using company resources and his private fortune, he had established a secret trust fund to provide anonymous financial support to those who might have suffered from the poison's effects. The payments were disguised as scholarships, unexpected insurance payouts, or anonymous donations during times of hardship. It is not justice, the last entry read, but it is the only atonement I can offer without destroying the lives that depend on the Blackwood name. I will carry this burden to my grave, knowing it is insufficient, knowing I have chosen the coward's path. May God forgive me, for I cannot forgive myself. Accompanying the journal were bank statements, trust documents, and a list of recipient families stretching across the country. Over the years, Edward Blackwood had spent millions in his quiet attempt at redemption, a fortune that had flowed silently to the descendants of those his grandfather had poisoned, while maintaining the family's carefully constructed facade of respectability. Gabriel sat back, processing this unexpected twist. Edward's journal revealed a man trapped between guilt and responsibility, making the only compromise he felt possible. It didn't excuse the continued cover-up, but it added a layer of complexity to the Blackwood legacy that the public narrative had missed. The black and white tale of villainous profiteers had gained shades of gray, not exonerating but humanizing. As Gabriel photographed the new evidence, carefully documenting each page and the accompanying financial records, his phone rang. It was Emma, her voice tight with the urgency that had become familiar over the past days. Gabriel, things are getting complicated, she said without preamble. Charles Blackwood has issued a statement denying all knowledge of the poisoned water. He's claiming Victoria is mentally unstable and has fabricated evidence to damage the family out of personal resentment. He's painting her as a disgruntled daughter with an environmental agenda who's willing to destroy her own family for political gain. Gabriel's jaw tightened, anger rising at Charles's attempted character assassination of his own daughter. That's not going to work. The evidence is too strong. Victoria has documentation stretching back decades. There's more, Emma continued, her voice dropping slightly as if she feared being overheard. Thomas Blackwood has filed an emergency injunction to have the house declared a hazardous site due to potential arsenic contamination. He's asking the court to order immediate demolition on public safety grounds. The hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning, and he's managed to find a judge who's sympathetic to the family. He's trying to destroy any remaining evidence, Gabriel said, anger rising in his chest. Clear away the physical proof before investigators can thoroughly document it. Exactly, Emma confirmed. The state police are trying to get the case reassigned to another judge, but there's no guarantee they'll succeed in time. We need something definitive, Gabriel. Something that proves the current Blackwoods knew about the poisoned water and were actively involved in covering it up. Otherwise, they might manage to distance themselves, claim they were innocent of their ancestors' crimes. Gabriel looked down at Edward's journal, the damning account of generational guilt. I might have found it. Edward Blackwood, Charles's father, kept his own journal. He discovered the arsenic in 1952 and shut down the bottling operation but kept the secret. He also set up a trust fund for affected families. Millions of dollars distributed anonymously over decades. That's huge, Emma said, excitement edging into her voice. But it doesn't directly implicate Charles or Thomas. They could still claim ignorance, say Edward never shared the family's secret with them. Gabriel flipped to the final pages of the journal, scanning the entries from the mid-1980s. Wait, there's something here. The last few entries, dated 1985, mention Edward's declining health and his fateful decision to share the truth with his son before dying. I have told Charles everything, the entry read. He must understand the weight he will carry, the debt that remains unpaid. To my surprise, he showed little shock, as if he had long suspected. His only concern was for the company's future. The past is dead, he said. Let it stay buried with the old man. I fear I have raised a son who sees balance sheets where there should be human faces. The trust will continue, but I go to my grave knowing that my attempts at atonement will end with me. Charles will protect the family name at all costs. God help us all. That's it, Gabriel said grimly. Charles is known for nearly 40 years. He didn't just inherit the company. He inherited knowledge of the poisonings and chose to continue the cover-up. Emma was silent for a moment, processing the implications. Bring the journal to the police station immediately. This changes everything. Thomas won't be able to bulldoze his way out of this with legal maneuvers. As Gabriel was about to leave, Ranger suddenly became alert. His ears pricked forward, body tensing in warning. A moment later, Gabriel heard it too, a vehicle approaching on the gravel drive, the distinctive sound of tires crunching on loose stone. He moved to the window and saw a familiar black luxury SUV parking beside his truck, its polished surface reflecting the late afternoon sun. Charles Blackwood had come calling. Gabriel quickly photographed the remaining journal pages and sent the images to Emma, along with a brief text explaining the situation. Then he slipped Edward's journal into his jacket pocket and went to meet his visitor, signaling Ranger to stay close. The dog followed fluid and silent, ready to protect his master if necessary. Charles Blackwood stood by his vehicle, looking somehow diminished since their last encounter. His expensive suit was slightly rumpled, his silver hair less perfectly styled. The powerful timber baron had been replaced by an aging man, watching his legacy crumble. Yet even in apparent defeat, he carried himself with the ingrained authority of someone accustomed to wielding power. Mr. Foster of Blackwood said, his voice carrying none of its former command. I believe we need to talk. Gabriel approached cautiously, Ranger at his side. About what? Your attempt to demolish this house or the fact that you've known about the poisoned water since '85? Blackwood's eyes widened slightly, the only indication that Gabriel's words had struck home. The man's self-control was impressive, Gabriel had to admit. A lifetime of corporate boardrooms and high-stakes negotiations had given him an almost impenetrable mask. I see you've been thorough in your investigations, Blackwood said, after a moment, his gaze moving from Gabriel to Ranger, then to the house behind them. More thorough than I anticipated. I found your father's journal, Gabriel said, watching Blackwood's reaction carefully. He told you everything before he died. About the arsenic, about the trust fund, about his attempts to make amends without exposing the family. You've known the truth for decades. Blackwood was silent for a long moment, looking past Gabriel at the old house, as if seeing it through the lens of memory rather than present reality. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost some of its practiced polish, revealing glimpses of the man beneath the corporate persona. My father was a conflicted man. He carried guilt the way other men carry ambition. He lacked the resolve necessary to protect what our family had built. Blackwood's words were dismissive, but there was something in his tone, not quite regret, but perhaps a shadow of it. He had a conscience, Gabriel countered, unmoved by Blackwood's attempt to frame moral consideration as weakness. He had guilt, Blackwood corrected, his voice hardening. A useless emotion in business. It clouded his judgment, made him vulnerable. He nearly destroyed everything my grandfather built, everything I've spent my life protecting. He turned back to Gabriel, his expression hardening. Do you know what will happen to this town if Blackwood Timber collapses? 300 people will lose their jobs. Businesses will close. Families will be forced to leave homes they've owned for generations. Oak Ridge will become another dead logging town, another casualty of progress. That doesn't justify covering up poisonings and deaths. Gabriel said, his own resolve unwavering. People died, Mr. Blackwood. Families suffered for generations without ever knowing why. Your father at least tried to make some amends. What have you done except protect your profits? Doesn't it? Blackwood challenged, his voice rising slightly. The sins of James Blackwood died with him. My father shut down the bottling operation 70 years ago. No one has been harmed since. The company employs hundreds, supports an entire community. Would you sacrifice all those living people for justice for the long dead? Except for those denied justice, Gabriel said. The families who never knew why their loved ones suffered. The truth that was buried alongside the victims. Blackwood waved a dismissive hand. Ancient history. What purpose does revealing it serve now, except to satisfy your own sense of moral superiority? He fixed Gabriel with a calculating gaze. What if I could offer a compromise, something that honors the truth while protecting the innocent? A solution that provides justice without destroying the livelihood of an entire town. Despite his distrust, Gabriel was curious. His military experience had taught him that even in the most clear-cut conflicts, compromise sometimes saved more lives than rigid principle. What kind of compromise, a foundation? Blackwood proposed, his voice taking on the smooth cadence of a practiced pitch, funded by the family dedicated to identifying and compensating descendants of those affected by the elixir. Full disclosure of historical records, medical research into long-term arsenic exposure affects everything. Public acknowledgement of James Blackwood's crimes and the subsequent cover-up. He paused, ensuring his next words registered fully. In exchange, Blackwood Timber continues operations under new management, not family-controlled. The company survives, jobs are preserved, but the Blackwood name steps away from direct control. Gabriel studied the older man, looking for signs of deception. Charles Blackwood had spent a lifetime navigating corporate politics and hiding family secrets. His proposal seemed too convenient, too neat. Why should I trust you? You've been covering this up for 40 years. You shouldn't, Blackwood admitted with surprising candor. That's why everything would be legally binding, overseen by an independent board that includes state officials and environmental experts. Full transparency, regular public reporting. He paused, something almost vulnerable crossing his features. My father tried to make amends in secret. Perhaps it's time for the Blackwood name to make amends publicly. Before Gabriel could respond, another vehicle appeared on the gravel drive. A sleek black sedan that parked behind Blackwood's SUV. From it emerged Thomas Blackwood, his face flushed with anger, movements sharp with barely contained rage. "Father, what are you doing?" he demanded, striding toward them with furious purpose. "You can't negotiate with him. The lawyer said not to have any contact." Charles turned to his son, his expression cold. "It's over, Thomas. Victoria has taken the evidence to the state authorities. Foster has found your grandfather's journal. We can't bury this anymore." Thomas's composure cracked the polished veneer of corporate confidence, shattering to reveal raw panic beneath. "So you're just going to surrender? Give up everything we've built, everything I've worked for?" His voice rose with each word echoing across the clearing. "I've filed for emergency demolition of this property. By tomorrow, there won't be any evidence left." "It's too late for that," Gabriel said quietly, watching Thomas's increasingly erratic movements with the caution of a man trained to recognize danger. "Everything's been documented, photographs sent to the police and state investigators. The story is already breaking nationally." Thomas turned on Gabriel, his face contorted with rage, all pretense of civility abandoned. This is all because of you and that damn dog. You should have taken the money when I offered it. You could have walked away rich instead of playing the hero." In a swift, unexpected movement, Thomas reached into his jacket and pulled out a small revolver, the metal gleaming dully in the fading light. Ranger immediately moved forward, a deep growl emanating from his chest, sensing the threat to his master. "Thomas!" Charles shouted, genuine alarm breaking through his controlled facade. "Put that away. You're making things worse." But Thomas's rational control had snapped, completely pushed beyond the breaking point by the imminent collapse of everything he had believed was his birthright. "I won't let you destroy our family, Father. Not for some ancient mistake. Not for her." He waved the gun between Gabriel and Charles, his hand visibly shaking. Get inside, both of you. Gabriel assessed the situation with combat-trained calm, his mind quickly calculating angles, distances, the probability of successful intervention. Thomas was unstable, the gun shaking slightly in his hand, indicating both emotional distress and likely inexperience with firearms. Direct confrontation would be too risky, with Charles potentially in the line of fire. Better to comply for now, look for an opportunity when Thomas was distracted. All right, Gabriel said, raising his hand slightly in a placating gesture. Let's talk inside. There's no need for this to escalate further. Thomas marched them into the house at gunpoint, Ranger, following close behind, his body tense but controlled. Gabriel had never trained the dog for attack, but Ranger's military background had prepared him to remain calm in dangerous situations. The dog moved with the same alert precision that had saved Gabriel's unit multiple times in Afghanistan, waiting for the command that would release him into action. Inside the library, Thomas gestured toward the hidden room. In there. Gabriel and Charles entered the bottling room, Thomas following with the gun still raised. His eyes darted around the space, taking in the dusty bottles, the copper filtering system, the entrance to the underground well. The narrow room felt claustrophobic, with 3 men and a large dewey, the air thick with tension and decades of dust. All this trouble over some old bottles and dirty water, Thomas said bitterly, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. Do you know what this company means to me? It's my birthright, my future. I won't let it be destroyed by ancient history. What's your plan, Thomas? Charles asked, his voice steady despite the circumstances, a father attempting to reason with a son he no longer recognized. You can't shoot us both and claim self-defense. The police are already investigating. Victoria has evidence. This won't end with our disappearance. Thomas's laugh had a manic edge, the sound bouncing off the walls like something broken. No, but I can lock you both down in the well chamber while I deal with this place once and for all. A tragic accident, old house faulty wiring, everything gone, including the 2 men who discovered the family secret. Gabriel tensed, ready to act if an opportunity presented itself. His eyes met Charles's briefly, an unspoken communication passing between them. The older man gave an almost imperceptible nod, understanding Gabriel's silent question. Ranger remained at the entrance to the bottling room, watching intently, waiting for a command. The well chamber, Thomas ordered, gesturing with the gun toward the small door at the back of the room. Now. As they moved toward the underground staircase, Charles suddenly stumbled, falling against his son with a convincing display of elderly frailty. The momentary distraction was all Gabriel needed. With a sharp whistle, he signaled Ranger, who bounded forward in a blur of gray fur. The dog didn't attack, but positioned himself between Thomas and the others, his teeth bared in warning, his powerful body a barrier of muscle and protective instinct. Thomas swung the gun toward Ranger, his finger tightening on the trigger. In that split second, Gabriel lunged forward, driving his shoulder into Thomas's chest with the full force of his combat-trained body. The gun discharged with a deafening crack in the confined space, the bullet embedding itself in the ceiling as both men crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs. Gabriel had the advantage of military training, but Thomas fought with the desperate strength of a man with everything to lose. They grappled across the dusty floor of the bottling room, knocking bottles from shelves, sending decades-old glass shattering around them. The air filled with the acrid scent of ancient chemicals and the metallic tang of blood as Gabriel's cheek was cut by broken glass. Charles Blackwood backed away from the struggle, his face pale with shock. The corporate titan, suddenly an old man confronted with violence he had never personally wielded. Rangers circled the fighting men, looking for an opportunity to help, but unable to intervene without risking Gabriel. The fight surged toward the desk where Gabriel had found Edward's journal. Thomas's hand closed around a heavy brass paperweight, swinging it toward Gabriel's head with murderous intent. Gabriel blocked the blow but lost his balance, stumbling backward against the shelves, more bottles crashing to the floor. Thomas advanced, raising the paperweight again, his face twisted with a rage that had been building for years, perhaps decades, the fury of a man who had spent his life in the shadow of family secrets, who had internalized the pressure to protect the Blackwood name at all costs. Before he could strike, Ranger darted forward, clamping his powerful jaws around Thomas's wrist. The dog didn't bite down with full force, his training too ingrained for that, but the pressure was enough to make Thomas howl in pain and drop his improvised weapon. Gabriel recovered quickly, tackling Thomas to the ground. This time he secured the other man's arms behind his back using his belt as an improvised restraint. Years of combat experience had given Gabriel the skills to subdue an opponent without causing unnecessary harm, a mercy Thomas likely wouldn't have shown had their positions been reversed. "It's over, Thomas," he said, breathing heavily from the exertion. "The truth is out. You can't change that with violence." Thomas slumped in defeat, the fight draining out of him as suddenly as it had erupted. Charles Blackwood stood silently by the entrance, looking at his son with a mixture of sadness and resignation, a father witnessing the culmination of generations of lies. The sound of sirens approached in the distance, growing louder with each passing moment. Someone, likely Emma or Eleanor, had alerted the police to the confrontation at the Blackwood house. The wail of emergency vehicles seemed to underscore the finality of the moment, the inescapable reckoning that had been a century in the making. Within minutes, the property was swarming with state police officers. Thomas was taken into custody, charged with attempted murder and conspiracy. Charles Blackwood, though not arrested, was escorted to the police station for further questioning about his knowledge of the poisoned water and the subsequent cover-up. The patriarchs of Oak Ridge's founding family left the property not in their luxury vehicles, but in police cars, a sight that would have been unimaginable just days before. As the chaos subsided, Gabriel found himself once again on the porch steps, Ranger beside him, both exhausted from the confrontation. The setting sun cast long shadows across the clearing, turning the old house golden in its fading light. For the first time since arriving, Gabriel felt the property had released some of its tension, as if the revelation of its secrets had begun a process of healing. Emma arrived shortly after the police, having been notified of the incident. Her reporter's notebook was forgotten as she rushed to check on Gabriel, her professional distance giving way to genuine concern. "Are you all right?" she asked, examining the cut on his cheek. From the fight, her fingers gentle against his skin. Gabriel nodded, the adrenaline of combat gradually fading from his system, leaving the familiar ache of strained muscles and bruised knuckles. "I've had worse, much worse." Emma sat beside him, her shoulder touching his in a gesture of quiet support that required no words. Ranger laid his head on Gabriel's knee, offering his own form of comfort. The three of them sat in companionable silence as darkness gathered and the last police vehicle departed. "Victoria called," Emma said eventually. "Charles reached out to her before coming here. He proposed the foundation idea to her too. She thinks it might be viable with the right oversight." "Do you think he's sincere?" Gabriel asked, still uncertain about Charles's motivations despite witnessing the man's conflict firsthand. Emma considered the question carefully, her journalist's instinct for truth weighing the evidence. "I think he sees it as the only way to salvage anything from this disaster. But whether it's genuine remorse or just pragmatism," she shrugged. "Either way, it might be the best outcome for everyone: justice for the victims, compensation for their descendants, preservation of the town's economic foundation." Gabriel's hand moved to his pocket, feeling the outline of Edward Blackwood's journal, the record of one man's attempt to balance impossible obligations. His father tried to make amends in his own way. Maybe Charles is more like him than he wants to admit. "Generational patterns," Emma observed. "James Blackwood's ruthlessness, Edward's guilt, Charles's compromise, Thomas's desperation, and Victoria breaking the cycle entirely." She glanced at Gabriel. "It's almost Greek in its tragedy." Gabriel nodded, understanding her reference. The weight of the past shaping the present, sins of the fathers visited upon the children, ancient themes playing out in this small Oregon town. At least this story might have a better ending than most Greek tragedies. The next few days passed in a blur of police statements, legal consultations, and media inquiries. Gabriel declined all interview requests, preferring to let Emma and Eleanor handle the public side of the story. He focused instead on securing the evidence from the house and beginning long-delayed repair work on the roof, which had started leaking after a heavy rainstorm. The physical labor provided a welcome relief from the emotional intensity of the unfolding drama, allowing him to process the events in his own way at his own pace. The story continued to unfold across national media, with historians and legal experts weighing in on the implications of the century-old fraud. Medical researchers began analyzing the available data on the elixir's composition and its potential health effects. Descendants of known customers came forward with family stories of mysterious illnesses, connecting dots that had remained disconnected for generations. A week after Thomas Blackwood's arrest, a formal announcement was made. The Blackwood Foundation for Historical Truth and Reconciliation would be established with initial funding of $50 million from the family trust. An independent board including Victoria Blackwood and Eleanor Barnes would oversee the foundation's work identifying and compensating descendants of elixir victims. The foundation would also fund research into long-term arsenic exposure and establish a museum documenting both the history of Oak Ridge and the dark chapter of the elixir business. Additionally, Blackwood Timber would transition to employee ownership with Charles Blackwood divesting his controlling interest. The company would continue operations, preserving the jobs that Oak Ridge depended on, but under new management and with a commitment to sustainable forestry practices that Victoria had long advocated. It was a compromise that acknowledged both justice and practicality, a resolution that held the Blackwoods accountable while protecting the innocent community that had grown up around their enterprise. Thomas Blackwood pleaded guilty to reduced charges, accepting a 10-year prison sentence rather than facing trial for attempted murder. Charles, though not criminally charged due to lack of evidence that he had actively participated in harm, agreed to step down from all public positions and cooperate fully with investigators. His fortune substantially diminished by the foundation's endowment, he retreated to a modest retirement, his legacy forever altered, but perhaps partially redeemed by his final acts. The Blackwood House, rather than being demolished, was designated a historical site. As part of the settlement, ownership was officially transferred to Gabriel, along with a grant from the new foundation to complete its restoration as a museum, documenting both the family's contributions to the region and the darker truth of their origins. The structure that had begun as a monument to deception would be transformed into a testament to truth, painful, complex, but ultimately healing. On a crisp autumn morning 3 months after the discovery of the hidden room, Gabriel stood in the library, now cleared of dust and debris. Sunlight streamed through the newly restored windows, illuminating the space with a warm glow that emphasized the rich patina of the woodwork. The bottling room had been preserved exactly as they had found it, though with proper lighting and informational plaques explaining its significance. The underground well had been permanently sealed for safety, though water samples remained available for scientific study. Ranger lay nearby, watching as Gabriel measured a section of bookshelf for replacement. The dog had become something of a local celebrity, his picture appearing in newspapers alongside accounts of how he had discovered both the spring and the hidden room. Children from Oak Ridge Elementary had even written letters to him, which Gabriel had pinned to the refrigerator in the newly renovated kitchen. The once fearsome military working dog now received treats and gentle pats when they walked through town, a transformation that mirrored Gabriel's own gradual reintegration into civilian society. The sound of a car door closing announced Emma's arrival. She had been spending more time at the house lately, helping with the restoration, when she wasn't working on her planned book about the Blackwood scandal. Her presence had become a comfortable constant in Gabriel's life, a partnership that had gradually evolved into something deeper, neither of them rushing to define it, but both acknowledging its importance. "How's it coming along?" she asked, entering the library with coffee cups in hand, her smile warming the room more than any sunlight could. "Slowly," Gabriel admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. "But that's restoration for you. No shortcuts, no quick fixes." There was a metaphor there he knew about healing, about recovery, about rebuilding what had been broken. His own journey mirrored the house's in ways he was only beginning to understand. Emma nodded, looking around at the transformation already taking place. The library was beginning to recapture its original elegance, the woodwork restored to a warm amber glow, the stained glass transom above the door repaired and casting colorful patterns across the floor. Books had begun to fill the shelves, donations from Eleanor and other town residents, creating a new collection to replace whatever had been lost to time. "Eleanor called," Emma said, leaning against a partially restored table. "The foundation has identified 68 families so far with documented connections to elixir customers. They're beginning the compensation process next month." Gabriel nodded, satisfaction warming him more than the coffee. "Good, it's a start." She also mentioned that Victoria is considering running for mayor next year. Apparently, her role in exposing the truth has made her quite popular in town, even among the timber workers. They appreciate that she found a way to preserve their jobs while holding the family accountable. "The Blackwood name being used for healing instead of harm," Gabriel observed. "Fitting." They moved to the porch now fully rebuilt and furnished with comfortable chairs that Gabriel had crafted himself from local wood. The view stretched across the clearing to the forest beyond, where the late afternoon sun filtered through the tall firs, creating an almost cathedral-like effect. At the edge of the yard, the spring that had once been capped now flowed freely through the channel Gabriel had created, its clear water catching the light as it made its way toward the distant creek. Ranger joined them, settling at Gabriel's feet with a contented sigh. The dog had aged visibly in the months since their arrival at Oak Ridge, gray showing more prominently around his muzzle, his movements occasionally stiffened by the joint pain common to his breed. But his eyes remained alert and intelligent, his devotion to Gabriel unwavering. They had been through war together, had faced death and survived, had crossed the country in search of peace. Now they had found it in the most unlikely of places. "I've been thinking," Emma said after a comfortable silence. "When the museum is finished, what will you do? Move on to another project?" Gabriel considered the question, watching the play of light through the trees. The question touched on something deeper. Not just his next project, but the direction of his life. His nightmares had become less frequent since coming to Oak Ridge. The constant hypervigilance, the feeling of being perpetually on edge, had gradually receded. He still had difficult days, moments when the past threatened to overwhelm him, but they were fewer and farther between. The house, with all its challenges and revelations, had provided not just occupation, but purpose, something he had lost when he left the military. "I think Ranger and I might stay," he said finally, the decision feeling right as he spoke it aloud. "This place needed healing. Maybe we did too." Emma's hand found his fingers intertwining naturally, a gesture that spoke volumes about the connection that had grown between them. "The house chose well when it found you two." Gabriel smiled, a genuine expression that had once been rare for him. "Or maybe Ranger chose well. He's always been the smarter one." At the sound of his name, Ranger looked up, his tail thumping against the porch boards in slow rhythmic beats. The dog had always sensed things that humans missed: water beneath the earth rooms, hidden behind walls, the invisible wounds that his master carried. In his own way, he had led them all to healing, to truth, to a kind of peace that Gabriel had thought forever beyond his reach. As evening settled over the Blackwood house, Gabriel realized that what had begun as a mission to fix a broken structure had become something much more profound. The house had revealed its secrets. The Blackwood legacy had been both exposed and redeemed. And in the process, Gabriel had found not just a project, but a home. The old combat engineer who had arrived in Oak Ridge seeking silence had instead found his voice. The man who had wanted only isolation had found connection with Emma, with Eleanor, with the community that had gradually accepted him as one of their own. The soldier who had been haunted by the past had found a future worth building, worth investing in, worth believing in. "You know," Gabriel said, watching as the first stars appeared above the tree line, "I've been thinking about getting a puppy, a companion for Ranger in his retirement. Maybe a training project for both of us." Emma's smile widened, lighting her face with a joy that made Gabriel's heart tighten with unexpected emotion. "I think that's a wonderful idea. A new generation, a new beginning." Ranger raised his head, looking at Gabriel with what could only be described as approval. The faithful companion who had saved Gabriel's life in war and in peace seemed to understand that their journey was not ending, but evolving. New challenges would come, new missions would present themselves, but they would face them together in this place they had claimed and healed and made their own. In the distance, the lights of Oak Ridge began to twinkle on one by one, a constellation of human persistence in the gathering darkness. The town, too, was healing, adapting to a new understanding of its history, finding a way forward that honored both truth and community. The revelation of this Blackwood scandal had not destroyed Oak Ridge, but transformed it, much as the uncapping of the spring had not destroyed the house, but freed it from its century of unnatural silence. The Blackwood house stood solid against the gathering darkness, its windows glowing with warm light, no longer a repository of secrets, but a testament to truth revealed in wounds mended. The echoes within its walls had finally fallen silent, replaced by the sounds of life and restoration. And in that silence, in that peace, Gabriel Foster had found the one thing he had never expected to find again after the war. He had found his way home.